The third flaw that I see in the Africa Rising narrative is that we have never actually tried to connect the so-called Africa's rise to decisions by Africans themselves. Africa is being painted with one brush as having risen, everybody should be happy. But I don't remember African countries going out en masse to China, to India, marketing their commodities back in the 1990s when this trade started. I hope that we can channel that anger into some constructive conversation that will lead to solutions to some of the problems that I'm going to highlight in my talk. I think that there is quite a number of profound flaws to the Africa Rising narrative. The first one being, we are coined not by an African, but a well-meaning Western journalist. Somebody who's standing outside, looking in, and comparing the state of the continent today to what it was 15 years ago. Obviously, it's better today than what it was 15 years ago. And we have embraced that narrative without questioning it. And I think that's why we are where we are, where I begin to question this whole idea of Africa Rising. And it's not the first time that we have believed without seeing. You know, the Africa Rising narrative is based on a very simplistic observation, an unfair comparison of the economic growth of some African countries over the last 10, 15 years, averaging something like 6 to 7%, compared to a very sluggish growth in the West. After the global financial crisis, the West has not been growing so fast. China had also around 1 billion people. But if China could rise at 18% at the peak of its rising, why would 6 to 7% be called impressive? Unless, of course, we have accepted a special standard for Africa, a mediocre standard for Africa. Today, China is growing at 8%, and the whole world is calling it a recession. But Africa growing at 6% is special. Should we accept this standard as Africans? And if so, to what end? Why would we do that? The third flaw that I see in the Africa Rising narrative is that we have never actually tried to connect the so-called Africa's rise to decisions by Africans themselves. Africa is being painted with one brush as having risen, everybody should be happy. But if you look at what has caused the GDP growth in these countries that have pushed up this average number, it's mostly commodities trade. But I don't remember African countries going out en masse to China, to India, marketing their commodities back in the 1990s when this trade started. It was the other way around. It's the Chinese who came looking. It's the Indians who came looking. It's the big Western oil conglomerates that came looking. Most times, facing resistance and all manner of issues from suspicious Africans who are sitting on resources whose value they don't even understand. What is driving our rise, but accepted the praise, I think that is a big flaw in this whole narrative that we need to start questioning. I'm going to try and back this up with some facts and figures. You know that in this century, but also even before, you cannot have meaningful development without electricity. Now, France has a population of 65 million people. yet it generates 4 times more electricity, 4 times, than all the 47 sub-Saharan African countries generate for their 805 million people. What that means is that a French person consumes 50 times more electricity than an African today. So what do you say if a Frenchman told you your continent is rising? You have to ask yourself, what exactly is he saying?